All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework from a recent design brief, the architecture of the Regenerative Wealth Reserve. But before we get into the heavy engineering, I want you to picture something. Juneau, Alaska, 1976. Governor Jay Hammond and a small group of citizens are sitting in a room, and they make a pretty radical decision. They decide their state's resource wealth doesn't just belong to the government or a handful of corporations. It belongs to them, together, across generations. And boom, the Alaska Permanent Fund is born.
Hammond laid down a foundational principle for that fund, and I quote, collective ownership and the fundamental fairness of sharing returns in equal proportion to equal ownership. Now, the author of our source material actually calls this the sentence they've been engineering toward for 40 years. It's the perfect setup for what we're digging into today, because we're looking at a blueprint designed to take that 1976 principle and scale it globally. We are talking about building a sovereign wealth fund that the planet itself can actually inherit. Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the Regenerative Wealth Reserve, or the RWR, we have to look at the massive paradigm shift it's proposing. Think about what we have today. On the left, fiat currency, measuring only financial capital, sweating over quarter-to-quarter time horizons. We rely on centralized banks for identity, and we depend on human editorial loops to decide if a company is quote-unquote doing good. Now look at the right. The RWR proposes a totally new algorithmic unit of account called the Lydian. It measures performance across 5 capitals, stretches time horizons to multi-generational scales, uses self-sovereign identity, and, here's the real kicker, it builds accountability mathematically right into the structure of the system itself.
So let's break this down. Section 1. The 4 core premises. The architectural foundation.
Shifting from traditional finance to this model sounds like a massive leap, right? But the architecture is actually super grounded. It rests on these 4 core premises. First up, it's a stateless global federation. The global layer sets the rules, but holds absolutely no national banking license or fiat money. Second, the actual banking, that happens via local nodes. These are fully licensed, jurisdictionally compliant trusts or foundations. Third, the whole system is backed by the audited intellectual property value of the Trapanaki Foundation. And fourth, everything is tracked in that Lydian unit of account. Now, the source makes a really crucial point here. This system isn't trying to displace sovereign countries or fiat currencies. No way. It literally rides on the same correspondent banking rails as the US dollar. It earns its spot simply by coexisting and outperforming.
Moving on to Section 2, the journey of capital, following the money.
With that groundwork laid out, let's do what any good financial investigator does. Let's follow the money through this master flow, and this brilliantly illustrates the whole picture. Don't sweat it if it looks a little intense at first glance. It's a 6 Sigma master plan showing 9 discrete movements across 6 different entity clusters. You've got the foundation on the top left, the global protocol, the local node acting as the engine right in the center, contributors on the left, real-world projects on the right, and the measurement layer anchoring the bottom. We're going to break down the absolute most vital steps of this journey right now. It all kicks off with Movement 1, seeding the reserve. Before a single dollar gets donated, there has to be solid backing. This is where the Fibonacci Foundation comes in, a Canadian trust holding a massive intellectual property portfolio. They get that IP externally appraised. Then that valuation flows right through the global RWR and is drawn down by the local RWR node as a balance sheet receivable. Basically, this audited IP value creates the hard upper limit on the aggregate Lydian credits the Federation can even issue.
Once the node has its IP backing, we hit the structural pivot of the entire shebang, movements 2, 3, and 4. A contributor donates their principal, let's say regular fiat currency, to the local node. That principal instantly becomes an asset on the local node's balance sheet, and in exchange, at that exact same moment, the local node issues a Lydian-denominated time deposit-style credit back to the contributor. So the donated principal is the asset, the newly issued Lydian credit is the matching liability, and it is all secured by that IP backing we just looked at.
All right, Section 3, identity and the liquidity ladder, unlocking value.
So the capital is officially in the system, but how do you, the individual contributor, actually interact with this totally new capital structure? Say hello to Priya. This is the self-sovereign identity primitive. In the RWR, you aren't logging in through some centralized bank or state authority. Every single participant holds a non-transferable Priya identity. That means every donation you make, every project you pledge to, and every governance vote you cast is individually traceable and completely non-repudiable. You, the individual, are the load-bearing primitive of the system here, not just another customer.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how your Priya identity interacts with those Lydian credits through what's called the liquidity ladder.
Your Lydian credits come with specific tier and term attributes. T0 is basically on demand, but it gives you the lowest yield. But watch what happens as you commit your capital for longer stretches. If you go T2 for a year or T3 for a minimum of 7 years, you don't just get a yield premium. T3 literally unlocks your right to direct where that capital goes out in the real world. And T4? That's the multi-decade generational tier. It actually hands you governance rights over the system itself. The latter structurally binds your time horizon to your participation rights.
Meanwhile, back at the local node, what exactly is it doing with that donated principal? That brings us to movements 5 and 6. The local node operates a lot like a conventional bank at this stage. It uses that asset base to open credit facilities and raise operating capital. That capital then funds a treasury trading book, which uses a validated signal engine targeting a 1% daily return floor. But, and this is a massive but, here is the critical rule. The source calls it the Hartwick discipline. They invest the rents, but never the principal. Principal preservation is an absolute, hard covenant, no exceptions.
Moving on to Section 4, Directed Allocation, Backing Real Projects.
Okay, so the local node is generating returns, but the ultimate goal of the regenerative wealth reserve isn't just to sit on a giant pile of money, right? The goal is to deploy capital to back actual real-world projects. Let's move to Movement 7 and see how this builds. Investor-directed backing. If you're holding a T3 or T4 Lydian balance, you actually get to give the system direction. You aren't spending your Lydians. Instead, you earmark a portion of your balance. That instruction tells the local node to tie a corresponding share of its credit and treasury capacity to a specific project that you chose. Maybe it's a new microcity. Maybe it's a generationally structured exo company or some other vital regenerative infrastructure. You are directly driving the allocation.
Which brings us to Section 5, the regenerative feedback loop. Structural accountability.
So capital is flowing into these real-world projects. Awesome. But how on earth do we ensure these projects actually heal the planet instead of just padding shareholder pockets while depleting resources? Well, we've arrived at the climax of the explainer. Movement 9, the 5 capitals scorecard. See, this system doesn't just look at financial returns. It measures performance across 5 capitals: financial, ecological, cultural, social, and generational. Everything feeds into this central hub: the operational performance of the project vehicles, the financial returns from the treasury book, and the real-world revaluations of pledged assets, like, say, a regenerated wetland.
So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly in this quote from the source. Accountability here is structural, not editorial. The system's regenerative bias is built into the math, not delegated to human virtue. Think about it. In your standard ESG frameworks, you're relying on a rating agency or some corporate board to decide if a project is, quote, good. But in engineering, as the author points out, you don't delegate success to goodwill. You build the bias straight into the machine. Guys, this isn't green marketing. It is hard-coded accountability.
And here is exactly how that math plays out in practice. Liquidity follows balance. If you're an investor and you earmark your balance to back a project, and that project knocks it out of the park across all 5 capitals, meaning it's making money but it's also ecologically and socially regenerative, your Lydian tier characteristics automatically upgrade in lockstep. The math explicitly rewards your choice by boosting your yield and your rights. But what if you back an extractive project? Say, one that makes a killer financial return, but totally wrecks the ecological or social capitals in the process? Well, the system applies what it calls the structural denial. Sure, you get your base financial return, but you are structurally denied any tier upgrades or governance rights. Like the source says, the system doesn't have anything personal against you. The math simply refuses to reward extractive behavior. Finally, Section 6, Multi-generational Impact, Building for the Future. By structurally rewarding regeneration and mathematically denying extraction, this whole system is designed to accumulate massive momentum over time. Think about the journey we just traced. It starts with a simple fiat donation, transforms into a Lydian credit, is governed tightly by your self-sovereign identity, and is directed by you to fund real projects. Thanks to the strict discipline of that 5 capital scorecard, it becomes a multi-generational force. It's stewarded by exponential companies and individuals holding those generational T4 instruments. And it does all this operating right alongside our existing banking systems, just playing by a far more disciplined, regenerative set of rules. Which leaves us with a truly profound final thought from the source material. We spend so much time and energy trying to figure out how our children will inherit our financial systems. But if our systems are built to inherit wealth, shouldn't we fundamentally redesign them to build wealth that the planet itself can inherit? The architecture of the regenerative wealth reserve provides a mathematically rigorous, structurally accountable blueprint to do exactly that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this leaves you as fascinated by this framework as I am.